Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Imagine Movie Podcast, a podcast where two very tired men watch a movie and then try and be coherent about it. My name's David.
Hi, David. My name's Sam, and yes, coherency, words in order correct? Question mark? Exclamation
Good
point!
start. Good start. Fortunately, this isn't one of those weeks that we so frequently have where we watch a really boring, shitty movie that Zack Snyder made and then have to trudge our way through that and trudge through the slop and somehow make a meal of that. This week, we watched a movie from last year, which is very much a curveball for us. We watched Civil War, a movie from last year, which is a
2024 documentary about things that
it's
are.
a I was going to say it's a very very minor near future. It's a very very minorly different near future,
Yeah.
where America is riven by civil war as they try and eject, as an alliance of secessionist states tries to eject a three-term neo-fascist president, who's been carpet bombing his own people, etc., etc.
It,
Um,
it's one of those movies
I mean,
that is.
it's one of those things you're gonna have to try and imagine a near future where that is a thing. Try
Yeah.
and conceive of that.
The question I've got is how much credit does a movie get when the thing that it's predicting is so close to happening? Like, because you think about 1985, Back to the Future, flying cars. Clearly, they'd got that wrong, and Blade Runner clearly didn't quite get that in 2014 we'd be doing. This is what life would be like. So, but you gave it a good shot because you're 30 years out and it's hard to predict these things. But I'm questioning whether 2024's Civil War gets any points whatsoever for predicting things that are mere weeks or months away.
You
Or
see,
is
this
that,
is an
or do you get more
interesting
points for
start
that?
point,
I
isn't
don't
it?
know.
Where I would argue it's not really trying to. Do we get a year in this? I don't even know if we get like a.
No, it's not pinning it, but it's the trend, isn't it? This movie feels like a movie that is very, very up to date with its kind of
And
course.
also
Even
not. Do you think that when was Trump elected? I feel
well,
like
he
it
was
was after
he was
this movie.
inaugurated January this 2025 this year.
Yeah, so
So
this movie came out or was being written and being made before the election.
yeah,
So I wonder if this movie had come out 6 months later, whether we would have a very different movie, where maybe it would be a little bit more pointed. Because we'll get into like the crux of this, because it's actually not really a movie about the neo-fascist third-term president bombing people. It's a road movie about these war correspondents, these war journalists. Basically, is the movie,
yeah.
and it's almost incidental, but it is interesting from just a. I really love this film, but maybe in 10 years, I think it will be interesting to look back, and wonder how prescient this film was, and be like, oh God, that was silly, as if we thought that could possibly happen.
Yeah,
And obviously, there's
and
that distance as well, where we aren't Americans. I think Americans received this movie a lot differently because I think it hit a lot closer to home than it maybe does for us.
yeah. And that's its strength, isn't it? I think is that it's grounded in detail. Like I think I like you, Dave. I really enjoyed this movie. I thought this was a really interesting portrayal of the detail of what happens when all this type of shit goes on. I mean, and we're not here yet. Clearly, are we? We're not quite at this level. And I think that is a like a lot of good movies. The prediction is in the detail. The prediction is in the small subtle changes that you don't necessarily notice until many years later and actually look back and go, oh yeah, a movie was saying these things and was making this point and doing it in a really kind of smaller way, whereas big sweeping movies like Red Dawn, there's a movie that is very overt in its messaging that Russians are going to invade Missouri or whatever, but doesn't really get to like what's the world going to be like? if that happens. And this movie, I think,
I think it's a clever way to do a movie. Red Dawn's a really good comparison, actually. We're talking about the original 1980s movie.
Yeah.
Is a really
terrifying, realistic.
Yeah, because it's a really good movie, and its strength is it's not alternate history. It's not telling you the story of the Chinese invasion or the Russian invasion of America. It's not telling you that story. That's just the setting. In a similar way to this movie, isn't really telling you the story of this civil war and this descent into war. It's telling you a story about these characters.
Yeah. There's no geopolitics.
It touches on it towards the end, but again, it's just a clever setting.
Mm-hmm. There's no geopolitics. There's no in the book, 2004. This happened. We don't get that scene setting. We don't get flying newspaper headlines, and that is absolutely to its strengths. And at the same time, I think some of the criticism of this movie as well, I think is kind of at the idea that it doesn't really say a lot about the things that are happening. Like it's almost shying away from the point, which is, hey guys, fascism could happen in America too. Like, we should be aware of this. And it turns out, yes, actually, literally, because it's happening right now. And we are
it's a tough one, isn't it? And we've discussed this on the podcast before, and I guess it comes down to I'm going to use the term artistic integrity, but just roll with me on this one. I think it comes down to the story that you want to tell, and I think that a lot of because I've seen quite a lot of criticism, a lot of the smarter individuals and American, especially film critics and professional film watchers, as opposed to us who are just two knobheads on the internet. They're paid knobheads on the internet. And their reaction again is what you're saying, is that maybe they felt this movie missed in terms of it could have been a really pointed kind of a forewarning, hey, this is what could happen. This is what we talk all the time. This is fucking some of the stuff that's happening in America right now. You can look at the 1930s Germany and be like, my God, that's the same thing. And I think that a lot of people feel this movie swung and missed because it doesn't go to any stretch to kind of paint certain factions in a bad light. But then from a movie going point of view, just from a purely entertainment point of view, I think it really, really helps the movie because it doesn't have it means it's not standing on a soapbox. It's not trying to educate you. It's not trying to tell you. It's just entertaining you.
Well, it can't. I think you're absolutely right. I think it's definitely to its strength that it doesn't do that. It's taking a step back, ellipses right until the end, and I think there's maybe the ending of the movie is where they kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater a little bit.
I really want to talk about the end of the movie.
We'll get to that. But I think there's a good comp to be made between the artistic vision of the detail that we've talked about, the artistic vision that you're talking about in terms of how do we take a step back, and also the objective role of journalists. And there's a metaphor that runs through this in that, obviously they say in the movie, we don't get involved, we just take pictures, or we don't try and change things, we take pictures so other people will try and change things. And excuse me, that's, I think, the movie's kind of leaning on that, isn't it? We're very much viewing things through what is never objective. As a journalist, you're not objective, but you certainly try and capture a wider experience that is not just your own. You're trying to really, you're telling stories, but you're not necessarily becoming the story.
It's a fascinating thing, photojournalism, especially war correspondence photojournalism. And it's a relatively modern. We've got loads of stuff from World War II, but it's kind of in its its infancy then. I meant to, and I didn't. This is the great, perfect moment where I'm going to tell you about a great idea I had that would have been really good on the podcast, and then I didn't do it. Okay. I was going to put together 7 or 8 really, really famous pictures from wars, and then ask if you recognise them. There's a couple from Vietnam that are really, really, really famous, like the National Geographic one. And there's again, didn't do the work, but there's another one that, again, there's a few that kind of ring down through the generations. Vietnam's a big war for for that's an aspect where photojournalism kind of like maybe woke the public up to what was going on in Vietnam and the realities of war. And I think that's something that photojournalism is kind of like uniquely placed to do. Is we can sit and read about how horrible the wars are. We can sit and read about like American soldiers torturing Iraqi prisoners and things to death. But there's a real difference between reading about it and seeing it.
A picture paints 1,000 words, doesn't it? And that's interesting about.
That's a really good saying, Sam. You should write that down.
I know. You should write it down. It's
good.
Make
some money from that.
The role of journalists in war has changed. You mentioned World War II. At that time, it was quite an embedded. Excuse me. It's quite an embedded kind of journalist role. So you had journalists, but they were part of the army or whatever. Like the control.
They worked for the Allies. They worked for the Nazis.
The censorship.
They were a part of the propaganda machinery.
Exactly. Fast forward, Korea kind of said, but even when you get, I think Vietnam is definitely that one, isn't it? That changes.
It's a turning point, I think. Especially, we're talking from a very Western point of view.
Of course, yeah. People like Don McCullum, who famous war photographer, and he took many of the photos in Vietnam, and that being like some of the role of journalists about telling the truth, especially in a war like Vietnam in America, where people started to question the truth, started to question the reasons.
The Vietnamese, I think, stuff like that in a way that you couldn't do in word.
It's absolutely fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. I think we could talk for many minutes on the intricacies of that. But I think when it comes to this movie, it's almost wrapping that up, and it's one of those great movies that it's a movie about journalists, which is for me kind of in the same vein as movies about movie making, in that it's very inward looking.
Isn't there?
It can be. I mean, obviously,
I wouldn't say this movie overly, but yeah, there is absolutely like a
no. But it's about the reverence towards journalism and being the first draft of history and all that stuff. I mean, obviously, the one that sticks out to me is All the President's Men, which is probably the quintessential journalist movie. Very, very different to this, to be clear. But I think when you look at some of the themes and how do we like value journalism, we watched The Insider, which is a movie about network television, 60 Minutes or whatever it is. But there's quite a lot of movies that I think I really enjoy because you get to understand how journalism works and the value of it and why we need.
Why it's dead.
Yeah, exactly. But look at things like Network, great, and another great, and latterly The Post, which I think is another movie that I kind of like, but at the same time does go to we like the old fashioned view of journalism, which is guys smoking in a large office.
I don't know. I can get behind Kirsten Dunst being the journalist I think of when I think of journalists.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. But I think there's a romanticism to all this, and this movie is kind of in that vein, is in terms of capturing the value of journalism and trying to kind of tell that story.
There's a kind of honour among journalists that we get throughout this movie, which we can touch on. I would like to talk through the movie a little, because I think the framing device and the way that it interacts with what we're doing, because ultimately this is kind of like a very stock characters. In some ways, you've got the older, jaded, like professional. You've got the young ingenue who's like desperate to make it. You've got the even older, like sage guide in Sammy. So you've got Sammy, Kirsten Dunst, and then Kaylee Spaney is like the new person, and that's very much like we've been telling stories this way in film for 100 years. It's very, very rote, but it works. It's solid. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah. Kirsten Dunst's character, I think, interestingly based, I think, on Marie Colvin, who was a journalist who died. When did she die? Like maybe 2010, something like that. American journalist, war journalist, and they were killed by. They were killed in Syria, I think. By the kind of government forces in Syria. And again, I think very much in that vein of like female journalists as well, female war journalists, which is quite a...
Well, she's named, the names, they talk about how she's named after Lee Miller, who was a female photographer, quite famous after her death for photos she took during World War II.
Yes. Oh, yeah, of course.
They talk about that in this movie, like quite openly, that's the...
Yeah.
That's why she's called that. And again...
There's so many
I think
examples,
it's really cool that they can just like quite subtly draw on, on like solid history of female photojournalists, especially, in a war zone where, it's mostly men, largely quite a male dominated field as a rule. So it's good to...
Yeah. And male violence as well, like being war being that typical display of male violence. I mean, it's just nice. It's nice to have that. It's nice to be exploring that, and then obviously the relationship then, as she's kind of reluctantly passing down the baton, I suppose, to Kaylee Spaney, who plays Jessie, and that being like a bit of a fractured relationship, because I think Kirsten Dunst's character is very much like, I have seen some horrible shit, and we as the audience get to see. I mean, some of the clips that we see, the guy with a tie around him, I mean, just like, what the fuck, man? Horrible. And this movie does not shy away from making you watch and view some really, disturbing stuff. But that, so she's kind of reluctant to be saying, yeah, you should do this. But I suppose the value, it comes back to, again, the value of photojournalism, the value of storytelling, to be able to challenge and to show and to do all the other things that we recognise as being valuable that journalists can do.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. And like you said, it's almost Dunst's character being like, you don't really want to do this, and you can tag along until the first bit of horror, and then you'll go, because obviously nobody could possibly want this, and I don't really want this anymore, and I've had enough. And I think there is part of that. There is some commentary here that from Dunst's character, that like the fact that it's in her home, it's happening at home, it's Americans versus Americans. I think that does add to the weight on this character, which I think Dunst plays really, really... I really like Dunst's career in the last 4 or 5 years. Has been...
Absolutely.
There's a really interesting, really dramatic roles, and she's always been good as an actor, but I just love that kind of like maturation into just these more weighty roles,
You feel like there's so much more to come from Kirsten Dunst as well. Like she's
really young. She's 42. Like she's definitely someone who I think of as our age, basically. She's not that much older than us.
Yeah.
But she's been in movies since we were kids, and since she was a kid, obviously. I think Interview with the Vampires, like the early 90s.
What's that great movie that she's in? We watched it for the podcast. The one that's the beauty pageant movie. Whoa, I don't know what it's called. I can't remember what it's called.
I can't remember the name. What is that called?
Oh Christ, it's absolutely brilliant. She's in Jumanji, isn't she? Which is another one that I remember.
She's in Jumanji. I just watched Virgin Suicides, actually, which I hadn't seen before.
No, I've not seen that.
Debut, and she's in that, and she's excellent in that. I think Kirsten Dunst has always had quite like a... And again, Interview with a Vampire, where she's like 8 or 9 years old or something. And again, she's always kind of had this gravitas to her. She's always had the dramatic chops, and it's kind of nice to see her sort of like in these roles. I again, really, really enjoyed her in this movie. I think I don't have any notes on her performance, really.
No, fantastic. Drop Dead Gorgeous was the movie I was
Gorgeous,
thinking,
of course,
which is wonderful and problematic from what I remember, but 20 years ago.
Yeah, there's certainly a very problematic,
despite her
learning disabled character. Certainly in that movie.
Why? Kaylee Spaney's, I think, is a good.
Our second Kaylee Spaney movie. Would you believe that we've discussed on the podcast?
Yeah, she obviously is going places, isn't she? We did the Alien Romulus movie. Fantastic. I thought she was brilliant in that.
She fully looks 10 years older in Alien Romulus than she does in this.
I know
the future. Clever.
The future is aging clearly. I felt very old watching this because I was like, "Wow, is she literally a girl? Like, is she supposed to be like on?" Like 15, 14 or something. She looks so young, and
Sam,
I think
it's
that
okay. You can put your joint medication away. She was born in the 90s. It's okay.
just about, yeah, but it's like
It's
10
okay.
years,
Just about.
like 10 years younger than us. It's ridiculous. But I think a good performance, and quite a quiet performance that gets out of the way of Kirsten Dunst, I think, which is very, very, very good choice. Like, she's not the lead. She's there to be to learn, obviously, from the character, but also I think that kind of supporting role is quite good, and I like the way that she kind of develops throughout as the movie progresses. Again,
she has by the end of this film, yeah.
yeah, all the PG.
Well, she has the quite reasonable reaction, doesn't she, when they're in a battle of like, fuck me, this is horrible, and she's throwing up and like, oh my god, what's happening? Why would anyone want to do this? This is terrible and terrifying and horrible.
It's kind of what I'm thinking.
And that gives way over the course of the film to like basically like PTSD, and then by the end of the movie, she's just like totally hooked and engaged.
And that being like the thing that Dunst gives her, and again, I think the ending, there's like a biffing at the end of course there is, and as I was watching this, I was actively thinking, how are they going to fuck this up? How are they going to mess up this ending, and how are they going to ruin the entire thing? And they didn't ruin it, but they certainly, and I think
it's an interesting way to do it, and it's so subjective, isn't it? Of like, maybe I'd have done something differently, but it's clever because the movie opens with Nick Offerman, who is a titular president, not titular, but the president of the Civil War.
The non-titular president, yeah.
Non-titular. I don't know why I said that. That's obviously false. Anyway, that's fake news, not
hey,
real.
Podcasting's hard, man.
We're not going to say who this is an allusion to, but I think it's clever. I think it's clever that Nick Offerman says he has his intro where he's kind of like vamping and lying, and the war's going really well. And doesn't want to say they're winning, but he's like, yeah, we are making gains. And he's just like,
yeah.
And that's
the
all
greatest war. The
greatest. And to cast Nick Offerman in this role and then not really have him be a character in the movie, I think is so clever, because it means the whole movie. Because the goal here is to go to DC, from New York, is to go to DC and interview the president and photograph him right before the American state falls, and so the whole movie, because it's Nick Offerman, you're like, well, he's really in vogue right now. He's really big. He's really well known. You expect him to have a large role in this movie. So the subversion of then him not being a character in this movie and them kind of like zigging a bit, I think it's so clever to use Nick Offerman when you could have just cast, like, I mean, how many mid-level working actors in America could play a president? How many 50-year-olds have we got who can play a president? Yeah. And to choose Nick Offerman, who presumably is in demand, again, I think that subverted my expectations quite a lot by the end of this movie.
Yeah, you're expecting a bit more of a role for Hermione, which I think is good not to have, because again, this movie's about the small kind of details. That journey across that be the fact that it's a road movie, I think, is really key, isn't it? And really part of the structure of the film, and adds to the.
Is. I just want to mention while we're talking about the road aspect, this is directed and written by Alex Garland, who wrote 28 Days Later, the Danny Boyle film. And he also wrote and directed Ex Machina, which came out in the mid-teens. Sorry. Good director, obviously really experienced in this kind of thing, like a road movie.
Yeah. There's quite a few movies that he's been involved in that I didn't really. Not really directed much recently, or semi-recently. Had a bit of a gap, didn't he? From
he's had a spate, but he's more of a writer. But again, just kind of like very experienced in this kind of road movie. He didn't have anything to do with Children of Men, as it happens. But that's another really good comp.
You stole my comp. That is,
you already mentioned it. To be fair,
yeah. That to me, Children of Men is like the movie that this is so close
Daddy,
to.
Please, we don't want to watch Children of Men again. We watched it last night.
I know it was fucking such a bleak movie. It's though I tell you what, there is, I think, so many comparisons to be made in a positive way, because Children of Men.
There's a lot of ways you could say that that's kind of like the British answer to this movie, like getting that angst on screen. that and 28 Days Later are very British, but they're very, well, what happened if the British state decayed? And then this is what happens if the US state decays.
Yeah,
in
but
a
again,
very
the
clever way.
detail. And this is where I think we have to go back to this, because it's such an important thing. Is that we're transporting our way through these events, through the subtleties of going to a town where the war doesn't seem to have affected them, and they zoom out and there's the two guys looking over,
There's like
or
an episode of the X-Files.
yeah, or like the way that the movie is very much focused on all of the different small things that build up to create this horrible situation that they're in, and that the war has evolved. Like we're not stepping back,
Yeah,
and we get
It's
more.
bleak, but it's not. We watched a really bleak, horrible Zack Snyder film last time. There's quite a lot of levity in this movie. There are moments where the characters, like, there's life, when they go to basically it's a refugee camp, but everyone's just having a barbecue. Like, that's nice.
Humanity, yeah.
There's a lot of humanity in this movie that kind of, because if it was just a firework factory for 109 minutes, that'd be a lot. It is a lot when a movie just puts its foot to the floor and doesn't ever let up. And this movie kind of like having a really tense scene, like the scene with the snipers, is really, really tense, and then it's over and we're driving along and we can just breathe. And then we have the Jesse Plemons scene, and that's absolutely fucking stellar, absolutely phenomenal scene. This is the scene with the mass grave. And again, we kind of, in a different way, because it's obviously a bit sad because Sammy's dead, but when we get out of that scene, we can just breathe. We can breathe out again, and it kind of like just gives this movie the space to live within itself.
Yeah, and I think that's critical, isn't it, in terms of the ups and downs. Like that's where this movie and Children of Men and a lot of good movies, road movies, allow the levity to just give you a bit of breathing space. The use of music in this film is quite clever at that, in that the kind of, we add a little bit of lightness to what is some pretty horrible shit.
It's also really bright as well. There's not a lot of this movie takes place at night. It's really bright. The colours really pop.
It's all there. It's all there for you to kind of explore, and I think so. A lot of the movie, I think it takes place in that tone and that feel. I think when we then do get the really impactful, horrible shit, and some of it is deeply upsetting and deeply affecting in that way, it hits harder, because you've had what feels like a light moment, even when they're getting sniped and they're having to hide from the sniper. Like, it's, well, you guys shut the fuck up. There's a lot here that's actually there that is quite funny in the context of a horrible situation they're in. And then, I mean, the mass grave bit, before that we get the bit with the jumping between the cars, and it's all very funny, and then all of a sudden it just turned. There's this little ratcheting it up, and you think, well, what's happened to the Kaylee Spenny's character's name, who I have no idea. Jesse. What's happened to Jesse? Like, what's this guy done? And you see the car, and it's got anything. Oh shit, something's bound to happen. And then it really forcefully says, yeah, this is bad, and we obviously get.
That's also the closest bit that the movie. There's that and one other scene at the garage with the guys hanging. The closest thing the movie kind of comes to kind of commentary on maybe the psychology of people. So at the garage, the guy's like quite proud of the fact that they've hung up and beaten these guys, and they're definitely going to execute them. And he's kind of like toying with Jesse. And then he's like, oh no, this guy bullied me at school. And like, and then that plays into like, oh, well, because you've all basically just formed a militia, you're just like enacting revenge on people. And it's pretty horrible. And then the Jesse Plemons scene is like, oh, this guy's just a racist white supremacist who, like,
it's unclear which side he's on. Even it's not like he's dressed in uniform, but they're like, we don't know who this guy is. We don't know what, if he's been given a mission, or like, has he been given orders.
The movie does that throughout, to be fair. Like, the snipers are the same, and in the one the spot, it even says to I want to say his name at least once. Joel, played by Wagner Moura, says to him, he's like, "Oh, which side are you on?" Because he's a journalist, he wants to know, and he's like, "It doesn't fucking matter. This guy's trying to kill us, so we're going to kill him."
Yeah.
Like right now, it doesn't matter.
Stupid? Like,
it's not relevant. Just shut up while we. don't
And
die.
that's a commentary in itself, isn't it? That's the commentary of the horror. The massacre scene, with the mass graves. It's terrible, but it really reminds me of Full Metal Jacket, the Vietnam movie. Not in a very specific way, just in the nihilism of that scene, the nihilism. Apocalypse Now as well. It kind of like there's like a lawlessness to how the Vietnam War is portrayed, and the bit in Apocalypse Now where they're shooting the villagers in the rice field from the helicopter, like dreadful, and you think, how would that happen? And the reality is
Shocking
that
truth that if you arm a bunch of young men and teach them to follow orders, and that a certain race or a certain creed of people are the enemy, you're going to dehumanize them, and they're just going to become monsters.
This is my rifle. There are many others, but this is mine.
War II, every side in every war commits atrocities, and I think there's certainly in film there's like a rich history of showing that and using that because it's powerful. And in this movie, like you said, the fact that we never really know who Jesse Plemons, who he works for, whose side is he on, it plays into it, because it's like, well, no, but both sides might be digging mass graves for people they've murdered.
It doesn't. It doesn't really matter
because war is horrible, and people have the depths to do absolutely disgusting things, and it is equal opportunities. There isn't one side of this war that's the savior and one side that's the evil. It's people doing horrible shit to each other. There is something fundamental
in America, and that's where I think this movie is making a point about how we for many in the West, and it includes people in Britain as well, these are things that happen elsewhere, and that's the shocking nature of things like the war in Ukraine and what's happening in America as well, is we're at the end of an epoch. There is a shift culturally and historically happening, and we're not really, I think, coping with that. The fact that things aren't. Whereas, wars happen in Africa or wars happen in the Middle East, but they don't happen here. And as soon as they start affecting us in real ways, then it's like, holy shit, we've got to do stuff, and we've got to make sacrifices, and we've got to change.
Absolutely, and this movie captures that well. I think it sounds so reductive, but just the fact that it's white people speaking English, it does bring it home more.
Just like Children of Men did. I think
or 28 Days Later, which I realise is a zombie film, but there's a lot of similarities though. The lawlessness that we talked about. The
lawlessness. It reminds me of playing my favourite video game, which is DayZ, and in that game...
Fucking hell. How 30 minutes and you haven't brought up DayZ and you've ruined
I've never mentioned DayZ in the podcast, but in that game, the whole premise is that there is no fucking rules, isn't it? Anyone can do whatever they like, and there isn't anything to stop. There's no... The post-apocalyptic feel, I think, runs throughout this, and I think, we've talked about the zombie movies being very much a trend of the mid to late 2000s, and having 2001 to 10, that was zombies everywhere, and I think that holdover is there. But what's going to be funny is that it's not going to be zombies anymore. I think the post-apocalypse is going to run through, but it's going to be what we did to ourselves. There's not going to be some fucking viral strain. It's going to be when we bombed the fuck out of each other. I think that is going to be there in our media for the next 10 years.
Yeah, we can draw, and like this movie, we can draw on some fantastic 1970s and 1980s films. And there's a lot of homages in this, in some of the way it's shot and some of the scenes that we have, that kind of homages to even some Utz films like Jarhead and the other really famous
comp.
The other really famous Iraq War film, and again, there's kind of a rich history in film of these things. It's kind of cool this film feels like a bringing together of a lot of that, and the sci-fi aspect, kind of lends itself. Shall we talk about the ending?
Well, so as I'm just reading through the messages, because this is how we make notes, isn't it? So I started watching the movie at blah 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 20. So about an hour in. It's about an hour into the movie. I message you saying, "I wonder how they're gonna fuck this up. I wonder how they're gonna completely fuck up the landing, and they're not gonna stick this, and they're gonna take what is a really interesting movie, and they're gonna do the opposite of what Children of Men did. Children of Men ends, spoilers, with Clive Owen bleeding out on a boat. He's delivered the woman who's pregnant, the first pregnant woman in 20 years, and that's the end of the movie. They disappear into the mist, and we don't get to see. We get a little tiny audio cue of children laughing, and that's the end of the movie. And that's as far as the movie is willing to go in terms of saying that there is any hope in the world, that things are going to change, that things. The movie is very much a poof. We're ending it there, and I suspected all the way through this movie that we were going to get to the same point, and the movie was going to have some kind of hopeful message, or it was going to have some kind of like resolution, and we were going to. It ends. But what I worried about is that we were going to take all of this kind of like detailed nihilism, all the stuff we talked about, all the gruesome, all the reality, and we were going to basically just either discard it by saying, "Oh well, it was all right in the end," or we're going to do something that just doesn't quite embody, I think, what has been a really realistic portrayal of how this. Obviously, the focus of the movie is on the president. So seeing the president at the end and having the interview where he gives a bombastic speech about we must fight for freedom and blah blah, like we don't do that either. So I don't want to be too critical, but I do think personally, if I was editing this movie, the scene where Lee dies, it's a bit over the top. Like no, like Homer Simpson in the Star Wars episode with Luke Hamill, you know what I mean? Like the Bodyguard episode. It's a bit like that. And she shoves him out of the way, and then she's on the floor. Kaylee Spaney looks down at her and says, "The baton has been passed. You have sacrificed yourself for me, and now I am the future of photojournalism. Thank you." And she walks off. The point where I cut, the point where I end the movie, is when she turns around, looks at her, she takes a photo of the dead Kirsten Dunst, and then that's the end of the film. And you don't tell us anything else. I don't want to know what happens to the president. I don't, the subtlety of that, of just saying, okay, like there's more story to be told, but we're not going to see it here, I think is much better than what we do get, which is they go in, they capture the president, he gets executed, but don't worry, they get one more line out of him, which is, "Please don't kill me," or whatever else. Like, it's fine. I don't hate it at all. I just think there is a much tighter narrative decision to be made there. And I think cutting before we get to see that, cutting with that final photograph being the end of the movie, I think is much more effective, in my opinion.
It's tricky, really. The Kirsten Dunst's death is foreshadowed a little. This scene is foreshadowed a touch. A lot earlier in the movie, Kaylee Spaney is sort of like just asking her about being a photojournalist, and she says, and they're talking about, how important it is to just keep shooting, and she says, if I was killed, if I was shot, in front of you, would you photograph it? Would you? And she says, and she's honest, and she said, yeah, of course I would, because it'd probably make really impactful photojournalism. So then that kind of like leads straight into the Kaylee Spaney, and I agree, it's a bit stagey, as she's falling backwards, and the movie uses these photos quite really. We haven't mentioned it actually. The movie uses photos really well throughout, where as the photographers are taking photographs, we see the black and white kind of like still,
it pauses at the frame.
Which I really liked in the movie. You were saying you'd looked in, so I'm just going to say this bit of trivia that you'd found, that the Kaylee Spaney's photos, while the images we see were like
they were stage versions, because she had a camera.
They basically took the photos she took, but obviously they were really bad because she's not a photographer.
Yeah, and the lighting wasn't right.
exactly, and the lighting wasn't right. But then they used them for the reference to get the shots.
Yeah.
So
Which is great. So
half,
cool. She's taking photos, and they didn't capture exactly, but they got they got someone who knows what they're doing to take the photos and get the composition right.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
But again, it's just a really effective way to do the film. And I do agree this last scene is a bit stagey. I didn't hate the Nick Offerman president thing. I think it's almost funny, the "please don't kill me" line, and I think that's what the movie's trying to go for. Is it's maybe a bit more nihilistic of like none of it mattered. Like, obviously this guy's dead. Obviously, if you've got a dictator, it's like Hitler in the bunker. He was never walking out of there. Like, he was not going on trial in Nuremberg. He was not fleeing to Panama. Like,
and there is a question about the whole. As soon as I get to DC, the whole the Battle of the Lincoln Monument and everything. Like, okay,
this feels like the visual artists were like, we want this. We've
got to see it. We've show us what we.
They maybe could have had a tighter leash on the firework factory.
It's
a bit long. I think the whole conclusion of the film's a little bit long. I think that we have
in a 1:48 movie, we could shave. We could not get it. We're not going to get down to 90 minutes.
Cut 10 minutes out of this ending in places, and I agree. Like the Lincoln Memorial battles, like a really cool shot. That's you keep that, but lose some of the. We're walking up to the the bunker outside, the White House. Lose some of that. Lose
some of the
violence
White House
and everything.
Stuff. Yeah.
I
think it's about aiding the storytelling, isn't it? How do we get to the get to the story?
Ultimately, when the camera is showing helicopters like crashing and tanks, and it's all really cool, but we kind of have hit pause on the storytelling at that point.
Yeah, compared to Children of Men, and again, I think this is such a beautiful movie.
We go to the firework factory at the end of that as well.
We do, but what a scene! Do you remember that scene where they were having the battle in the apartment, and then the baby is crying and everything stops? I mean, it's a breathtaking, spine-tingling scene where they're walking out and this whole battle has stopped because and it's a war. It's like a war movie, and it all just ceases because everyone's seen this baby, and then someone shoots and it all starts up again, and they have to run. Like there's so much of that. I think that they could have learned. Just in terms of just really getting to the point. What is the point? And so we began with that criticism of this movie that it kind of maybe skirts or ducks some of the point. And I think the movie's trying to have its cake and fuck it a little bit here, to use one of our favourite phrases, because we want to have a big-bellied guy with a massive red tie who looks a bit pathetic on the floor. We want to have Trump. Basically, it's Trump. Basically, let's just be honest here. It's
because they want to never possibly be elected again.
No. Third term.
So we're going to exercise our demons by literally shooting Trump in the Oval Office.
I can't believe how predictive this movie is about Alaska, about Greenland, about third term. I mean, these are all things that are happening, Dave. It's staggering. It's staggering how close reality is to this. But basically, they execute Trump at the end, and you can say that it's not, but it absolutely is him. It absolutely is him. They execute Trump, and I think either you're making a movie about the perils of authoritarian fascists, neo-fascists, or you're making a movie about photojournalism, the value of photojournalism in capturing and telling the story and capturing what happens so others can make change. There's one or the other. At the end of the day, you have to pick one of these lanes. You have to commit down, and I think the movie tries to have it's a photojournalism movie, and we're passing the baton from one, the young generation of the older woman to the younger woman, and that's great. Well, brilliant story, and the value of, and she's going to take a photo of her in her death, and that's going to be valuable in itself. And then the movie's also like, yeah, but can we execute Trump yet? Let's do it. And I think it's a failure. It's a failure to not.
I don't hate it.
One of them. I don't hate it.
I do agree that it could be punchier. It's kind of like you said. It's a middle ground of we want to resolve the war in a certain way. I don't think they needed to do that. I think you could have ended the movie in the army camp when they find out that they're not that DC has fallen or is falling. Like, I think there's a way to end the movie there and have it be a satisfying like film, because again, I really am a proponent of like films should be entertaining, and sometimes films can be important, sometimes films can have a message, and sometimes films can like have this incredible influence over real world events. And then, but a lot of the time, like you want people to enjoy watching it, and the ending seems to be kind of like in the middle, doesn't it? Where it is entertaining,
Yeah.
it is a bit long, and you are left thinking like, and how do I feel about that?
How do I feel about all the horrible shit I've done? You've just dragged me through what is a very traumatic movie. Why? Like, there's a flippancy. It's slightly flippant, I think, at the end, after showing me what is some pretty horrible stuff. Like, it's quite a distressing movie, I would say. You know, it's not a war movie. It's more like Saving Private Ryan, isn't it? You know,
Yeah.
you're going to see some stuff that's going to stay with you, I think, and rightly so. But then at the end of the movie, to basically have this Trump analogy, and maybe that's our interpretation as people who are anti-Trump and who are more left wing, and we're like, oh no, it's actually Biden that they've like, I don't know. But anyway,
I think
like,
it's the one bit of the movie, Sam, where
it's just
the film slips a little bit into commentary, where for so much of the movie it isn't a commentary on this guy started
on the
war because
geopolitics
he's evil
of
and
it.
all of
Yeah.
this. Yeah, for so much of it we leave the geopolitics out of it, and I think by having the focal point of this entire failed state on screen getting killed, I think that you kind of irrevocably bring that back into the movie, and I think that's a mistake. I agree with you, because I think that the stronger part of this movie is the personal story of these photojournalists and the commentary on photojournalism generally, and like the toll it takes, and kind of like, because you're a combatant and a non-combatant, you're there in the fucking battle, like getting shot at, like, but it's not, you don't have a stake.
Just like at the end of All the President's Men, another, one of my favorite movies, an amazing movie about journalism, is when Nixon resigning happens off screen, and we don't get to see that. We don't get to see, there isn't anyone playing Nixon. We get to see it as the typewriter at the end of the movie, where it's Nixon suspected of, Nixon says he won't resign. 3 days later, the president has resigned. Like, it happens off screen. The crux of the movie happens off screen.
Because the movie isn't about Nixon.
It's about the process where of journalists doggedly uncovering the truth, and that being a valuable thing. So I think genuinely, I do think, in the way that I think there's lots of movies about this type of stuff where they're going to be rewatched and they're going to be remembered. I suspect this movie will not be remembered as maybe as fondly as it's been. Even our interpretation now.
I guess
because,
let's see how the next decade goes.
Well, that's the kit,
I think
but
that's
because
such a huge part of it, Sam. Because either it's going to be like, oh, that kit's very close to home, and that's uncomfortable to watch. Like this is a great comp. Like pandemic movies before the pandemic, from before the pandemic.
Literally, exactly
like that.
Right.
Now a movie where people are like not allowed to leave the house and there's a virus killing everyone. It's like that's a bit, again, it's a bit too close to home. But if actually somehow things turn around and we kind of brush up against this reality but don't get there, I think it could be looked back on as like a
Well,
like Red Dawn, like a movie which is kind of like, this is something that always seemed like we were 2 weeks away from it, like we were 1.3 missed meals away from this reality, and then we never got there. Like the Cold War, I think that is absolutely. And if that's the case, I think this movie would be remembered in a lot of the ways that Red Dawn was remembered for such a long time, as just a really good, entertaining movie that's kind of like a what if, and thank God it didn't happen.
That got it wrong. But then, like the pandemic movies, like, whatever, Contagion or whatever else.
Contagion, yeah.
There's things in that movie where you look back and go, oh yeah, but that's not how it happened, is it? Because we fucking lived it. Like, Jesus Christ. And so there's so many things where, because if it gets too close to reality, it's going to be wrong, because reality is the version of correct that we're going to take, and the whole COVID thing. Or it's so far away like a zombie movie that's kind of analogous to that, that it's kind of okay. So I think, yeah, it really does depend. If we have a civil war in America in the next 10 years, and if Trump tries to hold on to power, I think this movie is going to be probably much better remembered than if actually things fizzle out and it's not as bad as we all suspect. And
Better
Trump
remembered, but not as watchable, I think.
Yeah, if Trump isn't as, he doesn't try and hold on to power and basically just says, okay, elections are going to happen, well, then we're going to be like, oh, that movie's a bit dramatic. Remember when he executed a red tide wearing, president? Like, all right, chill out.
Like Red Dawn, it's like, oh, well, obviously it was silly. The Russians are never going to invade. Like,
yeah, it could swing either way.
But then the movie can rest on its laurels. And again, last thoughts here. I think this is a really bright, really visually and audibly like arresting movie.
Yeah,
I think the performances are generally excellent. I'm struggling to think of like a bad hammy performance in this. I think everyone's really good. It's obviously just like really competently made. It's interesting. I really, really liked this. When I first started watching it, and I was like, oh god, it's the post-apocalypse. I was a bit like pre-jaded, and actually, I fucking loved this movie. I found it so entertaining. The ending was a bit long, which made it feel like it was a longer movie than it was, because it's not a long movie, and that's my one fault. I think is just we got to the firework factory a bit soon.
I agree. I really, really enjoyed this. I thought this was terrifying and arresting and funny and light and balanced.
It's a great road movie. I think it's one of my favourite genres.
Yeah, it works so well.
Characters move around somehow. That just like imparts a lot of.
We just get to see more, don't we?
In the movie, doesn't it?
Yeah, we just get to see more. No, I think this is great. And again, other than the ending, which it's not a massive criticism, but I think it's enough. It's enough to tar it a little bit.
It's not perfect, is it?
I'd be knocking it down a good 1.5. I think based on just not being able to choose. But you know what? Movie making is about making choices, and I think you have to respect all the choices that you get to that point. To be able to make the wrong choice at the end means you had to make so many good choices to get there. Like the fact that that's the bit where we're kind of like quibbling, really, I think shows the strength of this script. It shows the strength of the performances, the strength of
definitely, and it's kind of like a good sign
choices
for the movie industry as well. I think I've seen 6 or 7 movies from last year that I really, really liked.
Yeah,
I think that's a really great sign. For number one, of us like paying attention to things that are happening around us, I think is great.
Yeah.
And just generally, like, we should hit some more of them, because there's some really excellent movies last year.
I think so, and I think it's good. It's good to have movies that kind of like zeitgeisty of the time we live in. And
well, again, if we talk about this movie in 10 years or 20 years or 30 years or 40 years, like, we've done movies like this, not like that exactly like this, but like, fairly of the moment movies. And when it's from 1976, you're like, well, a lot of that went over my head because it's hard to.
Yeah, I don't remember the subtleties of the time, but that's maybe exactly where this we'll be back to this, and we don't get the references.
So if you watch this with fresh eyes, our grandkids, when they podcasts still inexplicably exist, when they're watching Civil War, and they're like,
and listening to
there's like a civil war going on. It's very strange. Nothing like the real Civil War, of course.
Yeah, that was much worse. Yeah, hey, remember when America invaded Greenland in 2025? Do you remember that, Dave?
2 months from now.
I know exactly. The reality being stranger than fiction, I think, is a real barometer for how well these predictive movies are gonna. Because you know what. It's been like 60 days of the Trump administration, and things are so fucking insane. Like, we don't even know. So I think by the time we get to...
We don't even know how much of it is just like Trump fluff.
Yeah, but by the time we get to actually...
such, like, terrifying random shit, like how much of it is just him like talking nonsense.
We're not even at the meat yet. We're not even at the actual good stuff. Like, there's so much insanity to come, and I think we need to start making movies about that now. So let's get on it, because...
Not in America, though, because there might be repercussions there.
Oh Jesus! It's so tiring. It's so tiring. But I think it's good. It's good that we have an outlet for all of this collective trauma that we're working through as in modern movie making.
Absolutely. So let's roll on watching some more good movies.
Indeed, indeed. Right, well, that's been a good one. We'll be back with something probably less good or from like 100 years before, I think, and that'll be a...
Literally like a 1930. I think we've got a 38 movie to watch.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
But we
Right.
could push for some different things. Maybe do something fun. You know, someone throw a pie type situation.
Yeah, someone throw
I think
a
it's
pie.
a biopic, the Oscar. It's like a 1938 biopic.
Maybe
Is
we
it
do...
biopic or biopic? Well, what do you fall on
Biopic.
that one?
Biopic.
Biopic. That's what I say. I think it's Americans that say biopic. And it
Biopic
always
is
sounds
fucking
wrong.
insane. What is that? Is that like a Lego toy from the 2000s? That's just not... No, we're not
Ask a
doing
doctor about biopic.
that. Biopic. Oh no, you've got biopic.
No, that's the medication, Sam.
Oh no.
It
I
treats
see.
something even weirder sounding.
Okay, right, yeah. Okay.
Ask your doctor about biopic. The one medication for genital herpes.
May cause death.